Sweetheart, I think you're in the wrong row. Shouldn't you be with your husband, wherever he is?" The words carried down the line of folding chairs, bright and easy, pitched for the benefit of the two women who sat beside the one who spoke. A small ripple of laughter followed. It was the kind of laughter that needed no joke, only a target. The woman in the plain blue dress did not answer at first. She sat at the end of the row, near the aisle, her hands folded in her lap, and she looked out across the parade field the way a person looks at the sky before a long flight. Then she said quietly, "You're right. I'll move down." She moved one chair. She did it without hurry, without apology beyond the words, and she settled again into the same stillness she had come with, as if she had brought it with her from somewhere far away, and meant to keep it no matter what the morning did. It was a good morning for it. The sky was high and pale, the flags along the field lifting and falling in a wind that smelled of cut grass, and, under that, faintly, of jet fuel from the flight line beyond the tree line. Rows of white folding chairs stood in the shade of an open-sided tent. Beyond them, the battalion was assembling company by company, and beyond that a reviewing stand, waited, empty, its chairs in a patient line. The woman who had spoken was Danielle Vaughn, and she wore the mourning like she had arranged it herself. 34 years old, in a crisp white blouse, with her sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She was the wife of a company commander, and by her own quiet decree, the keeper of the spouses section. She knew who belonged where. She knew the seating chart the way some people know scripture, and she had decided, in a single glance, that the woman in blue did not belong in it at all. "It's just," Danielle went on, turning to her friends, loud enough to be overheard. "They put these seats up front for the command families. You understand." She smiled without warmth. "There's overflow at the back. You'd be more comfortable there." "Thank you," the woman said. "I'll be fine here." It wasn't defiance. There was nothing in it to push against. That, more than anything, seemed to bother Danielle, who was accustomed to a reaction, a fluster, an apology, a retreat. She got none of these. She got a calm that did not so much resist her as fail to notice her at all. And there are people for whom being unnoticed is the one insult they cannot forgive. "No unit pin, no program, no idea where she's going," Danielle murmured to the woman on her right, who laughed a little and then looked away, out at the field, uncomfortable in a way she could not have named. Somebody's aunt got the date wrong. The woman in blue folded her hands again and let it pass over her like wind over a runway. Across the field, past the ranks of soldiers forming into companies, an old man in a gray sport coat had gone still. His name was Otis Reed, and he was 63 years old, and he had come to this ceremony the way he came to all of them, out of a loyalty to a uniform he no longer wore. He had been standing near the rope line watching the crowd assemble when something snagged his eye and would not let go. It was not the dress. It was not the face, not at that distance. It was the way the woman sat, squared, weightless, her attention moving over the forming battalion, the way a hand moves over familiar tools in the dark. Then he saw the bracelet. It was a thin black band on her right wrist, dulled with wear, the kind a person did not buy and did not take off. Reed had one of his own in a drawer at home that he could not bring himself to wear and could not bring himself to throw away. He knew what that band was. He knew what it cost to earn the right to put one on, and he knew that a woman who wore hers to a stranger's ceremony, plainly, without a word, was not a woman who had wandered into the wrong seat. He looked from the bracelet to the set of her shoulders, and his mouth moved around a word the wind took before it reached anyone. He did not sit down. The woman in the blue dress watched the color guard rehearse the uncasing of the colors at the far end of the field. She watched the way the sergeant's hands found the ties. She watched the way another person watches a craft they once practiced, and she did not blink, and the black band caught the light on her wrist and then went dark again. The seats filled. The sun climbed. Somewhere, a generator hummed under the speaker stand. And out past the trees, a rotor spun up and settled again. A sound the woman in blue turned her head a quarter-inch toward and then let go. A young specialist worked his way down the rows with a stack of programs and a cardboard tray of water bottles. His name was Dylan Cass, and he was 21, and this was the first ceremony he had been trusted to help run, and it showed in the careful way he counted chairs under his breath and rechecked the seating card in his hand. He reached a family 2 rows up, an older couple looking lost, and he pointed toward the field and said, "You'll want to face the flags, when they do the thing with the flags. Sir, ma'am." From the end of the row, without looking up, the woman in blue said, "Guidons. The tall one in the center is the colors. That's the one they'll pass." Cass turned. "Ma'am?" "The little ones on the poles are the guidons. 1 for each company," she said. "The one they case and uncase, the one with the streamers down the staff, is the unit colors. That's the whole ceremony, really. Everything else is just people standing in the right place at the right time and trying to look like they were born, knowing how." He blinked at her, and then he smiled, because she had said it the way you say a thing you have said 100 times, gently, without any wish to be admired for knowing it. It steadied him more than any order could have. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." He set a program on the empty chair beside her, and after a second's thought, a bottle of water, too. In case it gets hot. It always runs long. "That's kind of you, specialist," she said, and read his name tape, and gave him a nod that he would find himself standing straighter under without understanding why. He moved on down the row. The woman opened the program, glanced at it once, and set it down. Her eyes went back to the field. She watched a company on the left settle into formation, and she noted, the way another person might note a crooked picture on a wall, that its second rank stood a man short and had dressed the gap wrong to cover it. She watched the color guard walk the sequence again and saw the color sergeant fumble a tie and recover. She watched the reviewing stand, where a lectern stood empty, and a row of chairs waited for men who had not yet come. She was watching the way a person watches something they have done, not something they have come to see. At the rope line, Reed caught the sleeve of a passing sergeant major. "Who's taking the battalion?" he asked. "Low." "The incoming. What's the name?" "Lieutenant Colonel, sir," the sergeant major said, distracted, one hand pressed to the radio in his ear. "Coming down from division. They've held the name off the program. Some kind of records mix-up, they said. We'll hear it at the orders, like everybody else." He moved off toward a knot of soldiers near the stand. Reed looked back at the woman in blue, at the bracelet, at the stillness that wasn't the stillness of an old woman lost at a ceremony, but the stillness of someone who had learned, a long time ago, and at a price she was still paying, how to wait without spending anything. He already knew. He had known since the bracelet. He simply could not yet make himself believe the shape of what he knew, because the shape of it was too good. And Reed had lived long enough to be suspicious of mornings that turned out too good. Up the row, Cass leaned toward Danielle Vaughn and said, "Please to be helpful. That lady down on the end knows all about the colors and the guidance and everything." Danielle glanced past him at the woman in blue and laughed. "That lady," she said, "is lost, honey. Go count your chairs." Danielle had found her subject for the morning, and she worked it the way she worked every room she had ever decided was hers. "I'm just saying," she told the 2 women beside her, not troubling to lower her voice. "There's a section for guests, and there's a section for family, and then there's whatever this is." She tipped her chin toward the end of the row. "You dress for the occasion, don't you? You make a little effort. You show some respect for the command group when the command group is being honored. The woman on her right, the one who had already looked away twice, said, "Danielle," softly, the way you say a friend's name when you want them to stop before they cannot. "What? I'm being helpful." Danielle smiled and warmed to it, inventing as she went, the way her kind always did. I'll bet she saw the balloons and the flags from the road and thought there was a craft fair. Bless her. Somebody's grandmother wandered off from the commissary. A little laughter, thinner now. One of the women was not laughing anymore. The woman in blue drank a little of the water Cass had brought her and said nothing. She had the gift, rare and maddening to a certain kind of person, of being spoken about as if she were not there and simply declining to arrive. She watched the field. She turned the black band a quarter turn on her wrist, once, the way another person might check a watch, and let her hand fall still again. A few chairs away, Specialist Cass came back down the row with the last of his water bottles and slowed as he passed the end seat, the way a young man slows near something he respects without quite knowing why. He caught the older woman's warning glance and the flat, closed set of the whole row, and he did not understand any of it, but he filed it away where he kept the things he meant to figure out later. Whatever was happening here, some instinct told him. The quiet woman at the end of the row was on the right side of it, and the loud one in the white blouse was not. A gust came across the field then, sharp off the flight line, and it lifted the edge of her sleeve, and for a moment the bracelet showed fully, not just a black band, but an engraving cut into the metal, a name and a date, worn shallow by years of thumbs passing over it. The older woman 2 seats down saw it. She was perhaps 60, straight-backed, a mother or a widow of the service by the look of her, and she had buried people, and she knew a memorial band when she saw one across 2 folding chairs. Her face changed. She sat up. She opened her mouth to say something into the laughter. "Anyway," Danielle said, rolling right over her, "somebody really should have said something to her at the gate. You can't just wander into the good seats and expect the world to rearrange itself around. Ma'am." The older woman's voice was quiet and flat, and it cut through the row like cold water. "Let it be. You don't know what you're looking at." Danielle blinked, caught for half a second, a flush climbing her neck. Then she recovered with a small laugh and turned to face the field, as if she had decided all on her own that she was finished, which is what people do when they have been stopped and cannot admit it. At the rope line, Reed had taken 1 step toward the seating and stopped himself. The adjutant had just walked to the microphone and tapped it, and a voice rolled across the field, asking the guests to please find their seats. The ceremony would begin in 5 minutes. Reed stood with his weight forward, an old man doing the arithmetic of his knees and the crowd, and deciding whether they would let him do what he wanted to do, which was cross the grass and take that woman's hand and say a name out loud into all of it. He decided instead to trust the ceremony. It would say the name for him. It would say it better than he could, and it would say it in front of every single person who had spent the morning deciding she was no one. The woman in blue closed her hand over the bracelet and held it, the way you hold something to keep it from being taken. If you have ever sat quietly and watched someone decide that a still woman is a joke, stay with this one and subscribe to the Veteran Vault, because you are going to want to see exactly what the next 4 minutes do to this field. The 5 minutes did not sit well with Danielle Vaughn. She was a woman who measured a morning by whether it bent to her, and this one had not. The woman in blue had refused every hook, had not fled, had not fought, had not so much as frowned. She had simply sat there being still, and the stillness had begun, somewhere under Danielle's certainty, to feel less like weakness and more like a door she could not find the handle of. And now, with the crowd settling and the reviewing party due at any moment, Danielle found that she could not leave it alone, because the one thing worse than losing was being ignored while you lost. She stood, smoothing her blouse, and stepped to the end of the row as if to check on a guest. Her hand closed on the back of the woman's chair. "I really do have to insist," she said. Low now. The performance narrowed to a private edge. "The command group will be seated right here in a moment. It would be appropriate, for you to move to the back. Let me help you with your things." And she reached for the program and the water on the seat beside the woman, gathering them up as though the matter were already decided, and only the woman's body remained to be relocated. The woman in blue laid her hand flat on the program. "I'm seated correctly," she said. That was all. Her voice was even, almost gentle, and her hand did not press or grip. It simply rested there, and the program did not move. And Danielle found that she could not take it without making a scene she had not planned to make in front of the very people she performed for. For a moment, the two of them were locked there, the standing woman and the seated one, Danielle's manicured hand hovering over the program, and the pale, steady hand resting flat upon it. It was not a struggle. Nothing in it moved at all. But everyone in the nearest chairs felt the air change the way it changes just before weather, and one by one they found reasons to study their own laps and their own programs. Danielle straightened first. She told herself it was because the ceremony was starting, and not because a woman half a foot shorter than her, seated in a plain dress, had somehow made her feel like the one who did not belong. At that moment, the honor guard, running one last rehearsal at the field's edge, brought up their rifles and fired the volley. The crack of it rolled across the grass, 3 reports snapping into one, and the whole tent flinched. Programs jumped in laps. One of Danielle's friends yelped and pressed a hand to her chest, and then laughed at herself, embarrassed. A baby somewhere behind them began to cry. Danielle herself started hard, her shoulders jerking up toward her ears, her carefully arranged face coming apart for a second into something plain and startled. The woman in blue did not move, not a blink, not a breath out of rhythm. The volley cracked the morning open across 800 meters of open field, and she sat inside the sound of it, as if it were rain on a tin roof, her eyes on the color guard, her hand still flat on the program, her pulse. Had anyone been close enough to see the pale skin of her throat, utterly unhurried? The friend on Danielle's right noticed. She started and stopped, and looked at the woman with something new and uneasy in her face. Danielle. She didn't even blink. "She's hard of hearing, probably," Danielle said, too quickly, and let go of the chair, and stood there a moment longer than she meant to, off her balance in a way she could not explain to herself and would not have admitted if she could. Then, because retreat was not in her, and because she needed the last word the way some people need air, she leaned down and said it, the sentence she would spend the rest of her life wishing back into her mouth. "I don't know what you think you're doing here," Danielle said, "but this is not your day." The woman in blue turned her head then, for the first time, and looked at Danielle Vaughn directly. Her eyes were pale and steady and entirely without heat. The eyes of someone who had looked at far worse things than a rude woman at a ceremony and had kept flying straight through them. "We'll see," she said. Reed had run out of patience with his own caution. He came up the aisle faster than a man his age had any business moving, one hand out to steady himself on the backs of chairs, and he reached Danielle's row just as she straightened up from her last remark. He did not raise his voice. He had learned long ago, in rooms far louder than this field, that the quiet register was the one that stopped people cold. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't think you understand who you have been talking to, but you are going to want to stop. Right now. For your own sake." Danielle turned on him, and here at last was a target she recognized. An old man in an off-the-rack sport coat. No uniform, no rank she could see, presuming to correct her in her own section, in front of her own friends. Her relief at finally having someone she could push back against made her sharper than she might otherwise have been. "And you are?" she said. "This is the family section, sir. If you don't have a seat assignment, there's overflow at the—" "I have stood on a great many fields," Reed said, "at a great many of these. And I have never once seen it go well for the person who did what you have been doing this morning." "I run this section," Danielle said, her chin coming up. "I would thank you to sit down and let me do it." Reed looked at her for a long moment, and whatever he saw in her face made him close his mouth on the rest of what he had come to say. It would keep. It was about to be said for him by a colonel with a microphone, and there was a justice in that he did not want to spoil. He stepped back, his jaw worked once, and he looked, instead, at the woman in blue. And the woman in blue looked back at him. It was the first time their eyes had truly met, and something crossed the distance between them that had nothing at all to do with the morning, something 26 years deep, made of engine noise and thin air and red smoke, and a name they both still carried on their wrists. Reed's eyes had gone wet. The woman gave him the smallest nod, barely a movement of the chin, the nod one professional gives another across a room that has no idea what it is looking at. Some debts do not need to be spoken. They only need to be seen, once, by the one other person who was there. Reed lifted his own chin a fraction, a man coming to a kind of a tension in his heart, if not yet in his body, and he did not sit down, but he stopped, because she had told him to with a nod, and he had spent a whole career learning to read her smallest signals and to trust them with his life. If she wanted the morning to run its course, then the morning would run its course. Danielle, for her part, took the old man's retreat as one more victory in a morning full of them, and said something to her friends about people who could not mind their own business at other people's ceremonies. 2 of them did not answer her. The third looked at the woman in blue, and then at the black band on her wrist, and said nothing at all. The morning had begun, somewhere underneath all of them, to tilt on its axis, though only Reed and the woman he was watching could yet feel the angle of the floor. At the front, the adjutant returned to the microphone. Feedback whined and died. "Ladies and gentlemen, the ceremony will now begin. I would ask that you please rise for the arrival of the official party." Boots struck the grass somewhere off to the right, a cadence coming closer. The battalion, until this moment, a loose assembly of companies, drew itself up rank by rank into a single-held breath, 800 soldiers going still as one body. Danielle sat back down, satisfied. She had faced down a lost old woman and a rude old man in the space of a single morning, and she believed she had won both, and she began to arrange her face into the pleasant, proprietary expression she wore, for occasions where she expected to be seen. She had no idea what the next 4 minutes were going to cost her. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault so you don't miss the exact moment it lands. There was a valley once on the far side of the world, and it was the year 2010, and the woman in the plain blue dress was 31 years old, and her hands were on the controls of a medevac helicopter running fast and low toward a smear of red smoke on the ground. Her call sign was Sabre. Below her, the country came up in ridges and dry riverbeds the color of old bone, and somewhere in the folds of it, a platoon of infantry was pinned and bleeding and calling on the radio for the aircraft that answered to that name. There were 4 wounded on the ground, one of them urgent, a young rifleman who would not last the afternoon. There were, by the fuel gauge, 11 minutes she could afford to spend in this valley before the arithmetic of the flight home stopped adding up. And there was ground fire, She could see the winking of it, small and bright and patient, strung along the high wall to the north like a bad string of lights. In the back sat Sergeant Danny Ruiz, 24 years old, her flight medic, checking his kit for the third time, because that was how he kept his own hands from shaking, which was how he kept everyone else's hands from shaking too. His voice came calm over the intercom, the way it always did, the way that made green crews believe they might live. We go in, we load fast, we come out. Easy day, ma'am. Easy day, she said, and meant it the way you mean a prayer you don't believe, because saying it was part of how it got done. The landing zone was a bad one, canted and tight, ringed by rock, and the smoke rolled the wrong way across it. The fire off the north wall found them as she brought the aircraft down into the bowl of it. She held it there anyway, skids barely kissing the slope, the engines screaming to keep the whole machine from sliding down the hill, while Ruiz and the crew chief hauled the wounded aboard through a noise like the end of the world. 40 seconds. 50. She counted the litters not by sight, but by feel, by the way each man's weight settled the airframe a little lower under her hands. Last one. Last one. Go. 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 She pulled pitch. The valley dropped away beneath the aircraft, and in that same half-second, there came the sound a crew never forgets and never mistakes for any other. A flat, hard sound, different from all the rest of the roar, and the calm voice in the back stopped in the middle of a word and didn't start again. She flew. That was the thing she had been made for, and the thing she would never entirely forgive herself for being able to do. She held the aircraft steady and level, and she carried 4 wounded soldiers up out of that valley and over the ridge and home, because the living were her cargo, and the job was always, only, the living. And she did not turn her head to look into the cabin behind her, because she already knew what she would see, and because if she looked, she might not be able to fly, and if she could not fly, then 5 people died in that valley, instead of 1. They lived. All 4. The urgent one lived. Ruiz did not. On the ground, in the rotor wash and the sudden terrible quiet after the blades wound down, she took the black band from Ruiz's kit, the one he wore for someone of his own, and later, that night, she found a marker and wrote his name and the date on a new one and put it on her own wrist. In time, there would be a citation, and a general reading it aloud, and a medal the color of a winter sky pinned to her chest in front of people who clapped. The Distinguished Flying Cross. She stood very still for that, too. She had learned by then that stillness was where she kept the ones she could not carry any other way. She never took the band off again. Not to sleep. Not to shower. Not for 16 years. The valley went quiet. The memory folded itself shut, the way she had trained it to, and the world came back. A bright, ordinary morning on a parade field, a wind off the flight line, and a woman in a white blouse laughing somewhere to her left at a joke about a still woman in a plain blue dress. The official party was crossing the field now, and the crowd was on its feet, and Danielle Vaughn rose with the rest of them, pleased to be seen rising. And as she stood, she let her hip knock the back of the woman's chair. It was not quite an accident. It was the small cruelty of a person who has decided the fight is won and wants to plant a flag on the winning. The chair jolted. The program slid off the seat and onto the grass. "Oh, you'll want to tuck yourself back," Danielle said over her shoulder, brightly, for the benefit of anyone still watching. So, the command group has the view. There's a deer. The woman in blue bent, unhurried, and picked up the program from the grass and set it on her knee and steadied the chair with one hand. And for a single beat, one beat only, something moved behind her eyes. It was not anger, exactly. It was a flattening, a going level. The look of a person who has just measured a room and everyone standing in it, and calculated to the ounce what it would take to end the whole matter, and how very little time it would require. It was the look that had once fallen across crowded briefing rooms and made loud men go quiet without understanding why they had. It surfaced now, took the plain measure of Danielle Vaughn, weighed her, and found her not worth the smallest part of the cost. Then it was gone, put away the way she put everything away, folded down and stowed, and her face was only calm again, and the moment passed so quickly that of everyone in the tent, perhaps 2 people saw it happen. One of them was Reed. He had been watching for it, had known it would come the way you know a squall is coming off the way the light goes gray at the edges. And when it surfaced and vanished again in that single beat, he let out a long breath he felt as though he had been holding since the moment he first saw the bracelet across the field. There she is, he thought, still in there, after the valley and the medal and the 16 years and all the quiet, careful stillness she had wrapped around herself like a flight blanket. Still in there, the whole of her, intact and waiting. He had half feared the years might have worn her down to only the calm. They had not. The other was 2 rows back, where Specialist Cass had seen the chair knocked and the program fall to the grass, and it lit something in him. He was young, and he had been raised right, and he had not yet learned the terrible patience that lets a person stand still while someone older is treated poorly in front of a crowd. He started up out of his seat to go and help her, his face gone hot, a young man about to do a brave and useless thing. A hand closed on his shoulder. Reed's hand, firm and dry and certain. "Easy, son," Reed said quietly, not taking his eyes off the field. "Sit tight. Watch what happens here. You are going to want to be able to say you saw it with your own eyes." "But that lady, That lady," Reed said, "is about to be just fine. Better than fine. Watch." On the reviewing stand, the party took their seats, all but one. A colonel remained standing at the lectern, letting the field settle under his gaze, and his eyes moved once, briefly, across the family seating, and came to rest for just a moment on the single empty chair at the center of the command row that no one, all morning, had come forward to fill. Then the adjutant's voice came across the grass, clear and formal and final, the voice that turns a crowd of people into an audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, the battalion will now pass the colors." Danielle settled back into her seat, smoothing her skirt over her knees, certain that the good part was about to begin, and equally certain of her own place in it. She had no way in the world of knowing that the good part had been sitting 3 feet to her left the entire morning, drinking a bottle of water that a kind young soldier had thought to bring her, waiting with a patience she had earned in a valley long ago for a field full of strangers to be told her name. Colonel Curtis Langley was 52 years old and had presided over a great many of these, and he had a gift for the pause. He let the field hold its breath. Then he spoke, briefly, about the battalion and its record and the weight of what a set of colors actually meant, that it was not cloth and thread, but memory made carryable, the names of everyone who had ever served and bled beneath it, handed forward from one pair of trusted hands to the next. "A unit," he said, "is only ever as good as the people it chooses to follow into hard places. This battalion," he said, and let it hang, "is about to become very good indeed." He turned. "Adjutant, publish the orders." The adjutant lifted the page. His amplified voice rolled out across 800 souls, standing rigid at attention, and a crowd of families holding themselves still. "Attention to orders. Relinquishing command. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Dell." A pause, exactly measured. "Assuming command. Lieutenant Colonel Meredith Hargrove." For a moment, nothing at all happened, because the name had landed on a field that did not yet know where to look for it. Then the woman in the plain blue dress rose from her chair at the end of the family row. She set the program down on the seat behind her. She stepped out into the aisle, and she walked past Danielle Vaughn's row, close enough that Danielle could have reached out and touched the hem of the dress she had spent the whole morning mocking, out onto the open grass, toward the center of the field, toward the 2 officers waiting there and the cased colors standing on their stand. The crowd made a sound, low and involuntary, 100 small breaths drawn in at once. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Dell, the outgoing commander, met her at the center of the field. He took the cased colors from the color sergeant's hands. He drew the sheath away, and the streamers spilled loose down the staff. Years of them, campaign after campaign, a whole battalion's memory shaken free into the light and the wind. And he placed the staff into the hands of the woman in the blue dress. She took the colors the way a person takes the one thing they have spent an entire life being made ready to be trusted with, cleanly, without a single wasted motion. She brought her right hand up in a salute so exact that it seemed, for a moment, to still the wind across the whole field, and the worn black band showed at her wrist just above the cuff. And Colonel Langley returned the salute, and out in the ranks, a voice near the front carried the words the crowd needed to make sense of what they were seeing. Distinguished Flying Cross, it said, and Dust Off, and Sabre, and the field understood all at once, in a single cold wave, exactly who had spent the morning sitting in the cheap seats being told to move to the back. Otis Reed came to attention where he stood, an old man in a gray coat, with tears standing on his face, and his heels together, and his hand arising, at last, after 26 years, to his brow. And Danielle Vaughn's face began to move, confusion first, a small frown, the mind simply refusing the picture in front of it. Then disbelief, the head giving a tiny shake. No, it can't be. Not her. Then recognition, the horror of it arriving in slow stages as she understood that the woman, now holding the battalion's colors in the center of the field, was the woman she had ordered to the back, the woman she had called lost and somebody's grandmother, the woman she had leaned down and told, "This is not your day." And then, worst of all, the last piece dropped into place. 3 ranks out on the field, standing at the front of a company held rigid at attention. Her husband, Captain Preston Vaughn, stared straight ahead with a face gone white as chalk, because he commanded a company in this battalion, and the woman his wife had spent the entire morning laughing at was, as of this exact moment, his commanding officer. He had heard none of what his wife said, and he had somehow heard all of it, and there was nowhere on that whole wide field for a man in his position to look. The colonel's mother, 2 seats down, closed her eyes. The friend on Danielle's right slid 1 full inch away from her along the bench. The tent, which had laughed all morning, sat very still. Lieutenant Colonel Meredith Hargrove turned with the colors in her hands to face the battalion that was hers now, and for one breath her gaze passed across the family seating. Not to find Danielle, not to punish anyone, only to see the whole of it, the way you take in a landing zone in a single sweep before you commit the aircraft to it. Then her eyes went back to her soldiers, where they belonged, and stayed. She could have ended Danielle Vaughn with a single sentence. That was the thing the field did not yet understand about the woman holding its colors, and would come to understand in the few minutes that followed. She had the microphone and the high ground, and every eye on that field turned toward her. One line, a glance down the family rows, a dry word about who gets to decide whose day it is, and the whole morning would have turned on Danielle and left nothing standing where she sat. Everyone there half expected it. Some of them, if they were being honest with themselves, wanted it, the way crowds always want the fall to match the climb. She did not do it. She handed the colors off to the color guard with a word of thanks, and she stepped to the lectern, and she spoke to her battalion, and she was brief because she had learned over a lifetime that the people who talk the longest have usually done the least. She thanked Lieutenant Colonel Dell for a battalion left better than he had found it. She said she had no interest in being followed on account of a rank sewn onto her chest. She would earn the following, or she would not, and they would all find out together which it was to be. And then she said the one thing that morning that made her level voice change. "Everything I know about this work," she said, "I learned from people who did not come home to be thanked for it. We carry them. That is the job under the job, and it does not go on a citation." She lifted her wrist a few inches off the lectern, and the black band caught the light, and she did not explain it, and she did not need to. Take care of each other. In 30 years, that is the only thing I have ever seen actually work. She did not look at the family seating even once. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. And if this story has reached something in you, subscribe to the Veteran Vault, so the next forgotten legend finds the people who need to hear about her. Afterward, out on the grass, the receiving line broke into knots of handshakes and photographs and careful congratulations. Captain Preston Vaughn came to her stiff and sick with dread and began, "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. My wife, this morning she—" "You owe me your best company, Captain," Hargrove said, not unkindly, cutting the sentence off cleanly before it could name anyone. "You will be judged by your work, and by nothing else, and certainly not by anyone's bad morning. Go and take care of your soldiers. I'll see you Monday." He swallowed hard and straightened, and something in him steadied under the plain fairness of it. "Yes, ma'am." Danielle stood a little apart from the rest, braced, waiting to be destroyed in front of the very people whose good opinion she had spent years arranging. When Hargrove crossed the grass toward her, the whole small crowd seemed to lean in for it. Hargrove put out her hand. "Meredith," she said simply, as if the morning had never happened at all. "It's a big field and a confusing day. It's an easy thing to get turned around on where you're meant to be." Danielle took the hand, because there was nothing else on earth to do with it, and opened her mouth and found she had absolutely nothing in it. I didn't know. I know," Hargrove said. And she let it lie there. Grace, offered plainly and without a hook in it, which is worth more than any reckoning and a great deal harder to receive. Then she turned, deliberately, away from the officers and the cameras, to the young soldier hovering at the edge of the group, and her whole face changed and opened. "Specialist Cass," she said, reading his name tape again and putting her hand out to him first, before the captains, before anyone. "You brought me a program and a bottle of water this morning when nobody else in this county would give me the time of day. I won't forget it. That's the whole job, right there, what you did. Don't let anyone train it out of you." Cass went red to the tips of his ears and shook her hand and could not find a word. And Otis Reed, standing near, laughed once, wetly into the wind. Hargrove looked over at the old man, who had known her across a whole field, by nothing but the way she sat, and she took his hand, in both of hers, and held it. And neither of them said a single thing, because after a valley and 26 years, there was nothing that needed saying that a hand could not say better. Later, when the field had emptied, and the white chairs stood in their crooked rows, and the wind had the whole place to itself, Lieutenant Colonel Meredith Hargrove walked alone to the post-memorial wall at the edge of the parade ground. She ran her eyes down the names until she found the one she had come for. She touched it with 2 fingers, Ruiz, and the black band rested at her wrist beneath it, and she stood there a long while in the stillness that had confused an entire crowd of people who had gone their whole lives believing that stillness and weakness were the same thing. They never were. They never had been. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.